You guys are sending us to jail, you idiots!
You're the only one that can calm me down.
I read about it in a magazine, and was just immediately intrigued by, I mean, not just that it was this unconventional heist and, you know, the target's books, which seemed sort of seemed unusual, but also that the perpetrators are definitely not the usual suspects. You know, they were young, pretty well-educated young men from good homes and good families and attending good universities, and so I was intrigued to understand what would lead people in that position to risk squandering all of that for something which so obviously seemed like it wasn't going to turn out well. And so at that time, the real perpetrators of the crime were in prison, and so we began to write to them and ask, you know, can you explain why you did this sort of thing? And it was what they wrote in their letters that took it from a great kind of, I guess, a great caper, a great heist movie, but to something which felt a little more, I guess, relevant, you know, about this need to be special and need to leave a mark on the world, and, you know, the pressure not to be average.
You ever feel like you're waiting for something to happen? That thing that could make your life special.
The thing about Spencer's character is that, you know, whenever you read how to write a script book, and the first thing it'll say is, you know, identify your main character, identify what they want, and identify their problem, kind of thing. And his problem is that he doesn't have a problem. You know, he feels like he wants to be, he has the ability to be a great artist, but he reads about all of the great artists, and the one thing they've all got in common is that they've had terrible tragedy and suffering and all the rest of it. And he's looking at his lovely suburban, quiet, middle-class life and thinking, well, where's that ever going to come from? And so he's in search of this experience, which is going to give him something defining. And I can identify with the sentiment. I can't really sympathize with complaining that you don't have enough trauma in your life is just a quintessentially privileged idea. You know, the real guys would remember the same events but quite differently. You know, so they would remember exactly the same incident but happening in a different location, or, you know, and that's the thing. You know, not only are they slightly unreliable narrators, but memory is also maybe not as reliable as we'd like to think it is. And so you're either faced with that choice of, you know, do I dramatize one version that is, you know, more dramatic, or I guess if you're a producer, you go for the cheaper version to dramatize, or, you know, in this case, we make a virtue of the fact that the memories don't always coincide, and so you see the same thing from two different perspectives. And so, because I based the screenplay on the things that they had written to me in their letters from prison, that, you know, often where they didn't add up, I wanted to include that as in part of the sort of fabric of the storytelling as well. I watched a lot of heist movies. I mean, I watched the ones that obviously that the real guys were watching, that were kind of inspiring or kind of influencing some of their behavior, you know, which was obviously Ocean's 11, and, you know, they watched Snatch and those kind of things. I suppose I went back to sort of some of the older ones, you know, The Killing, which was a Kubrick film, which I think is really a kind of classic heist movie, and then Asphalt Jungle and Rafifi, and, you know, there's a very different pace to those movies, you know, as audiences' attention spans have got shorter. You know, there's a sort of hurry up kind of quality to a lot, but actually that works against the building of tension. You know, it's not you know, you having something that feels really tense and really suspenseful, that really requires time, and not being kind of having this sort of kind of like ADHD kind of sort of need to keep throwing sort of explosions at the audience and stuff. So yeah, those were instructive, I guess, in you know, and I think there's a couple of scenes which in this film which audiences find very suspenseful.
I don't want you waking up years from now wondering what could have happened and who you could have been.
Are you sure you're okay?
It sort of felt like this was very much going to be a movie, but that the inclusion of the doc stuff would be very seamlessly kind of interwoven, but not really in any way verging into documentary territory. I mean, one movie that was influential was Dog Day Afternoon, which is, again, it's, you know, it's a story of a guy trying to pull off a bank robbery, and he's just not cut out for it, you know, and he's like 5 minutes into it, and the guy who's the getaway driver comes in and goes, gives him the keys to the car and goes, I've got to go. You know, I can't do this sort of thing, and the whole thing just starts to unravel in front of your eyes, and the way you see it playing out on his face is so kind of, it's documentary-like in the way that it's sort of set up and observed, I think. So that was definitely, you know, something that I made all of the actors watch as well. Yeah, I think it's very different from The Imposter in that, as you say, The Imposter was a doc with dramatic elements, and this is really the inversion of that. It's a drama, and there's these non-fiction or doc elements which are kind of peppered through with the intention of, I guess, bringing you into the movie and the story in a slightly more emotional way, you know, that you're not allowed to just be in movie world, which we're all very familiar with, where the consequences don't really affect us. You're kind of, I guess it's the difference between watching and participating, and the intention with this is that because you're never allowed to kind of suspend disbelief and go off into that safe movie play, you're constantly kind of pulled back into the realization that this really did happen, and where is it going to go? You know, how far is it going to be allowed to go before this fantasy that they have created of trying to be in a movie or trying to plan a robbery when you're not really qualified for it? You know, what I think as an audience, we're also kind of intrigued to know what happens if you cross that line, and are they going to do it? So yeah, it's really, I guess for me, it was just wanting to see if there's a new way of telling a true story that hasn't really been done before, and that the effect of it is a more powerful, emotional journey that you go on.